Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Build Responsive ASP.NET Websites, presented by DevExpress Web Program Manager, Mehul Hari. In this session, learn how to use the new DevExpress ASP.NET Responsive Web Application Template in Visual Studio, see how to get started using the template, enable adaptivity, and how to extend the template to add more features and functionality. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today, and we will send the link to you in a follow-up email. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Mehul.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone to Build Responsive ASP.NET Websites with DevExpress. Now, in the latest release, we have introduced a new project template that is fantastic, and that's what I wanted to show off today. So our agenda today is pretty much we're going to take a look at this new project template, look at its benefits, why it's useful, how you can leverage it, and then I'm actually going to take majority of the webinar to build and customize this template so you can learn all about it and learn and see how useful it is, how easy it is to customize. And so we're going to build a couple of pages within it, and this way it will help you to learn about the internal workings of its CSS, its JavaScript, and so forth, and layout, mainly the layout. Okay. And majority of the webinar today is about ASP.NET Web Forms because that's what this template is built on. However, everything I'm showing is available for ASP.MVC, and I mean classic ASP.MVC. And if you don't know what that means, please ping me and I'll tell you all about our different product lines we have for ASP.NET. Because while it seems like we have a lot today, the web is varied. There's a lot of different options, so we provide a lot of different options for you on the web as well. Mainly today it's about good old ASP.NET Web Forms and classic ASP.NET MVC, which is what the two templates are available for. However, we have plans. So I can hear you already saying, but wait, Mehul, what about X platform or Y platform? Well, I will address future plans at the end of the webinar, so please hang around, stay tuned, because of course I want you to watch the entire webinar first. And then, of course, we'll address questions and future plans at the end. Okay, so that said, let's talk about the new webinar. Now, whenever you're curious about what's new with DevExpress, just go to devexpress.com/new, and you will find the what's new information. Now, these are better than the standard release notes. These are actually linked to demos and blog posts and all that good stuff. And you can always click on the specific platform. And as you can see, in the latest release for ASP.MVC, we introduced this new project template. Now, this project template was designed after a lot of, I won't say soul searching, but basically we didn't like the previous template. It was good for its time, but the previous one, we knew we could improve on it. So what we did is we went back to the drawing board. We looked at a lot of support tickets, a lot of the feedback from our customers. And the one thing we realized is that, of course, we knew mobile is important as it grows each year, but it's really important for our customers because of different scenarios, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you can reach this project template by clicking, of course, on this demo link, but let me show you as well that you can always go to it, any demo, by just going to devexpress.com, clicking on demos here. I'll click ASP.NET here, and when you click on this responsive application, this will bring up this project template. Now, this project template, everything I'm going to show today about it, don't worry, there is a whole GitHub project where you can download the sample source code. However, a lot of what we're talking about today is available in the help as well. So if you take a look, click on this link here, this takes you right to the documentation. Now, in the documentation, you'll see that it breaks down what this project template is, all the options when you started in Visual Studio, the project structure, as well as what we'll be doing today, which is adding a couple of pages like a map and a form layout. So all of this is available in documentation if you prefer that. But we're going to actually walk through it in Visual Studio today, so we'll hopefully give you lots of great context about what and why we did a lot of this stuff. All right, so let's just dive into this project template. Now this template, as I mentioned, we designed it based on your feedback. Now, if you recall, as I said, when we first introduced this, we had some scenarios. Now, we of course wanted to provide responsive design because when we looked at those customers' tickets, we knew that a lot of you needed mobile support. A lot of customers are always asking us, well, mobile is really important to us. How can you do that? Well, over the years, you've seen us put a lot of adaptive and responsive features in our controls. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to give you a really great, and initially we thought we'll make it a demo. And we said, well, let's go further than that. Let's just make it a project template that you can derive off of. You can start using it out of the box. And so that's why I really love this, because you can start using it today. So it's a ready-made web application that has DevExpress ASP.NET controls built into it. And of course, with the Visual Studio integration, you get a wizard UI, which we'll look at and all that stuff. Now, what I really want to talk about is the approach we took to this. Now, we did what we call mobile first. Now, you might say, what does mobile first mean? Well, if you Google mobile first, you'll find a lot of great articles about what it is, why it is, all that good stuff. And let's just take a look at a standard image. And maybe this, yeah. So there's a good one from Frederick Gonzalo. And in it, the standard approach with web design initially was responsive. That said, listen, we know there's so many tablet sizes out there, so many phone sizes out there that we can't specifically code for each one of them. So rather, we're going to make the site responsive where we design it on the desktop, and then we'll make decisions for what happens when it's on a tablet or a phone. Well, the problem with this approach is that when you have a desktop site, we tend to make it with a lot of different components, a lot of different elements, and we get really a rich interface. And the hard part comes in is when you have to take away, and you have to make the tough decisions about, well, what do I take away? How do I arrange it now that it's on a smaller device? Oh, I have to go even smaller now. So, okay, so what comes first? And so this can be kind of difficult. And mobile first says, well, let's flip that around and start with the smallest design, smallest screen that we want to target first, and then size up. And so we can get richer interfaces as we build our screen sizes up. So mobile first is really a great approach for designing your website and getting a really great interface for all the way from the mobile size tablet up to the desktop. Now, mobile first is also important because Google recently has mentioned that they are changing around some of their rules. Now, let's see if we can find the Google first here. So mobile first has really become important for Google because Google changed their rules lately. And they even put out this whole thing that says prepare for mobile first indexing. And what they basically said is they are no longer going to take the desktop version. So if you just had a desktop version of your website, well, guess what? They are not going to give you the as much ranking as they did before. Now, we at DevExpress, we felt this. For many years we had a mobile site, but Google said, yeah, your mobile site's just okay, but it's not truly mobile. Well, and last year in 2018, we did a complete redesign. We got an awesome site, and now Google ranks us back up higher. But Google basically said that they're predominantly going to use the mobile version of the content for index and ranking. Now, that basically means if you don't have a mobile version of your site, guess what? Google's not going to see you. The Google bot is going to prefer that, yeah, we like it if you have a desktop site, but you really need to have a mobile version because, as we know, mobile is super important these days. And so not only, and they give you some guidance on desktops and responsive and all this good stuff. And so we took all of the know-how that we have for our sites and we built this fantastic site. Now, I'm going to be using a lot of the Chrome tools today. So as you can see, I hit F12, this will come up, and I've got the console view. So you'll see a lot of different issues here sometimes. So when you're working locally, a lot of errors will come up, and I'll try to explain what each thing is. But I'd rather that you pay attention really to the main content here. Now, as you can see, what's nice is this responsive site will automatically adapt. Now, as I mentioned, that it was built with a mobile-first approach. So if I take a look at the device toolbar here, and you can see if I'm emulating an iPhone 10 or a Galaxy S5, you can see that this responsive site built with DevExpress looks great. And it has several elements like a navigation bar, sidebars that we'll talk about in just a second, all that, but it looks great regardless of the layout. So let's say I've got an iPad Pro, and you can see as I size up, that it's adapting automatically. And I apologize because if this looks a little small, let me make it a little bit bigger here. But you can see that the site is responsive, it is adaptive regardless of which layout that I have. Now if I just go to a standard responsive layout, you can see that the size will automatically adapt. So let's keep this at 100%, and now as we adapt the site out, it will look fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the site itself. There are several main elements of the site. First and foremost is the appearance is built with a DevExpress Office 365 theme, but it's highly customizable, as I'll show you in a little bit. But the layout is built with 4 main elements, and that is a navigation bar, sidebars, an adaptive toolbar, and a sticky footer. So let's talk about this. So this is the navigation bar at the top here. Now this navigation bar, it is a fixed height toolbar at the top of the page. And the template uses a sticky nav bar, essentially that says, listen, I'm going to stay here regardless of how you scroll the contents on the page. Now, what's great about this is that regardless of, and let's hide this here and resize the browser completely, we can see that as I resize the browser completely, the navigation bar does a couple of things. First and foremost, it's sticky, but also as we size down, we can see that the menu will now collapse into an icon, but it still gives us access to it. Now, this is great for mobile devices. So not only does it do that, but it gives us some other options for mobile as well. So if we take a look, we've got, not only does this menu collapse, but we got this sidebar that as we size down, collapses into this hamburger menu. And we've also got this image icon with a company logo. Now I've got the several pages which I'll talk about in a second, but the logo also acts as the same as the home button as we typically come to expect in any standard website. Now we've also built in a sign-in button here that when you click will bring up a pop-up for the standard sign-in and register icons, layouts. Now what's nice is this is built with DevExpress controls, because a lot of times customers say, hey, we want to use the standard Microsoft login or whichever login you prefer, but you wanted to leverage DevExpress controls so that it uses the same theme. Well, great news, this supports that. Now, on certain pages, you also have additional sidebars. So for example, on the grid view, not only do I have the left sidebar, I've got an option for a right-hand sidebar as well. So that is great. So and as you can see, these sidebars are another element that are collapsible. So as we resize, we saw they can collapse down or they can be expanded. Now we saw the grid view has a right sidebar, but the scheduler does not. And so that's controllable by you as well. Now, what's great is that each of these pages can also have a sticky top toolbar. So as you can see on the scheduler here, we've got a sticky top toolbar that when we resize will stay here. So as I resize, you can see that this toolbar stays here. Now what's nice is as we resize, the toolbar can also collapse those buttons here as well. So the sticky top toolbar along with our navigation bar gives us additional options for what's on the page. So the menu items can hide their text and display only icons, and the items can hide one by one to the pop-up menu. So as I resize this, we can see that as we start losing room, those items will go and be hidden in the menu. Now, as we see, when I resize each of these items, I've got a rich desktop, but it's smart enough that as I lose certain things, that this will give me a great view regardless of phone or tablet that I'm on. Okay, so lastly, let me talk about the adaptive page layout content. Now, for the content, we made a key decision in here, and there's two ways to scroll on a page. There's scrolling only part of the page, which is what the scheduler does here. And this makes sense for the scheduler because it's a big control we need it to take, even though it interacts with these other DevExpress controls like the calendar and the list box and so forth and the filter. It's really the scheduler that is the star of the page, and we want it to have essentially full control. And so it's going to scroll only part of the page. However, the more popular approach these days is that we scroll the entire page and display a scroll bar on the side here. And that's what's happening here with the grid view. So you can see we've got a sticky nav bar and a sticky toolbar, but as I scroll the page, really it's the grid view that gets scrolled. And so we said that we wanted to show you how to do this in both ways. Typically, the grid view approach where you scroll the entire page is generally the popular approach where you have sticky elements and we scroll the entire content area. But you can see that this demonstrates both approaches for you based on how you want to do this. Now, the final bit of things that I want to talk about is the readability. And so a lot of times our customers have a lot of content, text that they want to display. And what's nice is that we added CSS rules. And so this is adaptive content that's using certain items from DevExpress themes, and that's why it looks really nice. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you can apply that when you're using this project template. So we'll talk about readability as well. And what's nice is that we've added, for example, certain rules. So if I click print here, you'll see that it hides certain elements like the nav bar and the sidebars and gives me only content that I want to print, and it makes it really nice. And so that's all built in to this project template. All right, so let's just dive now into Visual Studio. I'm going to go kind of fast. So as I mentioned, don't worry, all the code will be available. And I have faith in you. I know you'll be able to keep up. All right, all joking aside, it's actually pretty easy because we made this available as a project template. So if you click on File, New Project in Visual Studio, you'll see under Visual C# Web or Visual Basic Web, this DevExpress template gallery. Now I'll just select the standard name here, click OK, and what we'll see is we've got under ASP.NET. Now you'll find it under all as well. You'll see that there's all these platforms, but I say filter it out by clicking ASP.NET. And if you click on Responsive Web Application under Web Forms or MVC, you'll find this project template. Now, as I mentioned today, for the sake of time, I'll go with the Web Forms. Of course, if you want to see other platforms, let me know, and we can do other webinars in the future. The MVC approach, just as you remember, has some differences in terms of views and controllers and all that kind of stuff. And like I said, we can do that, a whole separate webinar on that if you prefer. All right, so under Web Forms, I'm going to click Run Wizard. Now, when I do this, what it's going to do, it's going to bring up a very simple wizard that really has one major option that you want to focus on, and that is the theme settings. Now, what's nice about this, as I mentioned, that this is using the Office 365 theme. And you say, well, wait a minute, Mehul, in the past, you always let me switch the theme to some other DevExpress. The thing is, we have really, like Johnny Ivy level designers that said, look, we've made a great project template here. Let's not just, completely mess it up by completely changing the theme. Now, after you create this project, you can still go in the project template and change the theme if you want. I suggest you change only these project base color or the font family. Why? Because this will still give you access to all of the, you can make a custom base color. And when you do that, we will adapt from the base color and say, okay, well, the different highlight colors should be this. Oh, you want to change the font family from, let's say, Segoe to Trebuchet? Well, we'll suggest a right font size. Of course, you can still control and change that. Now, I'm going to stick with the basics, but you can see that we are giving you guidance here. And so this guidance will help you make a great looking website regardless of the color and the fonts that you choose. Okay, Now you still have access to the standard ASP.NET items like the content length or the localization options. So I'm just going to stick with the standard options and hit create project. Now while it's creating the project, let's take a quick look back again at that documentation. As I mentioned, the project structure is pretty standard. What it's going to do for us, it's going to create an account folder for the login register forms, an app data folder for the things like the text article content, an XML file, as well as a sitemap file, which we're going to be dealing with as well. And there's a code folder for the DB context and the authentication helper code. We're not going to be focusing on any data binding stuff today. As I mentioned, I want to focus really on layout and how to leverage this template. I am for sure certain that 99% of you know how to take care of data binding with web forms. Okay, and really we're going to be talking about the content folder, and this contains all of our assets like images, CSS, JavaScript, and of course the root master file that does a lot of the magic for us, and really the root folder that has the grid view and the scheduler. Okay, so now we've got a project template built for us. Now I'm going to stick with the IIS Chrome. I've got a couple of other browsers installed, just like the Chrome DevTools, and I'm going to hit Control F5. So you'll see me do that a lot today, and the only difference from that versus F5, as you probably know, is that it doesn't attach to the debugger, so it's just a little bit faster. It just starts up IIS Express and runs it to load this up locally. Okay, so from File New, I have locally the exact same demo that we saw online. And so just from doing that, I've got a grid view that has other elements. I've got and the reason we did this is we made it interact with other controls, so you can see how these controls interact from the client side. So for example, from the toolbar, we've added some buttons that brings up a modal form, so you can see how to do that from the code. All this good stuff is built right in, and as I mentioned, it's adaptive, it's responsive, all those features we've enabled out of the box. So you can see that there's a lot available for us. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the DevTools a lot here, and as I mentioned, that you can test this yourself. I recommend testing this on your actual device so you can see how nice it is. Okay, so let's do this. Let's add a couple items. Now, one of the things is that a scenario that's very common with our customers is in web forms, they are building forms for the web, meaning that you have forms over data. We have a database and we need to expose the content of that database. So one of the things that's very common is that our customers really need to build several forms. And so we've built a control, and if you look at the ASP.NET technical demos, you'll see under the navigation and layout, there are several great controls. One of them is what we call the form layout control. Now the form layout control essentially solves this issue that lets you build forms. So typically to build this form, you'd have to say, okay, well, I'm going to drag this text box, then I'm going to drag a label, or maybe I'll do that and data bind it. Well, this form layout control essentially helps you do that by saying, listen, you can drop in DevExpress form layout control, data bind it, and it will let you build that form and customize the heck out of it. So it's really great. And what's nice is it's got responsive features built into it. So when you are on a tablet or so forth, and it's got adaptive features as well. So let's do that. Let's build a page where we actually add this specific form to it. Now, as I said, today I'm going to be using a lot of the online code, and in the past you will see that I recommend a different approach. So first, let's add a page. I'm going to right click on our form, I'm going to say add, and I'm going to select new item. The reason I want to do that is that you want to use the web form with master page. Now we'll call this form layout because we're going to be building a form layout page, and it's going to say, well, what master page you want to derive off of. We want the root master. Now the root master page, if we'll take a look, has all the smarts built into it. So not only have we put in that, viewport, we've got a special content and layout CSS, JavaScript that does all the reaction for. You know what? I'll talk about the JavaScript a little bit later. But as you can see, we've built all the menus out of it. We've built all the toolbars. All of this is built in for you. We've even got a footer so you can link to your own privacy policy in terms of service. So what's nice is when you derive off of that, you can see that we simply give you the sections that you're going to need. Here's the head section where you want to put in links to CSS and JavaScript. We've got the left panel content, right panel content, toolbar, and of course, the page contents that says here's where we're going to put in our main area. So now you can see just by adding a page and deriving off that root master, you have a really great layout. So now, as you can see, I've got this content that I've just added myself. So let's do this. Let's build this out. Now, before I build out a page, what I want to do is I want to add a page control so we don't just have a form layout. Maybe we have some other pages for content as well. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring in a page control. And the page control, as you'll see, is a really versatile control. Now you can find its demo under navigation layout under tab control. And you can see the page control allows you to do that. So we call it the page control / tab control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this code. Now why would I do that instead of dragging and dropping it? Well, a lot of times the customers say, how do I leverage when you guys show me these demos? And I'll show you that you can do that by a lot of times just bringing in the code. But you want to be a little bit careful about it. So the first thing is I brought in the code. And as I mentioned, you want to be a little bit careful because as you can see, it's referencing a CSS class that I don't have because I just copied it from DevExpress.com. And so I'm going to remove a couple of items here, the active tab index as well as the CSS. And we want to replace those images. So right now, I've got some ASPX images for the London Tower Bridge. So I don't want that. And let's take away these other tab pages. Instead, I'm going to make a couple items here, and we'll call it page 1 and so forth. And so what this allows us to do is it's going to allow us to create other tab pages ourselves. So now I can say, listen, I've got not just one tab, one page, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so we can come in here and rename this, and we'll call this page 1, this will be page 5, but you get the idea. So let's go ahead and change these over to the other names that we want. And so we'll change this to 3. And as you can see, that this gives you full control over how to do this. So now we created 5 pages and we just updated their text. So now if we take a look at this in the browser, just by adding that, I've got the form layout, the page control available on my page. Now what's nice is that if I hit F12 here, and as I start resizing this, as you saw, we've got all those features. I've got the collapsible side panels available, but you can see this page control isn't very adaptive. Well, the good thing is this control does have some responsive features built into it. So as you can see that if I start resizing this page here, that it starts hiding some of those tab controls and gives me these nice scrollable buttons. Well, how does it do that? Well, we'll see that if we use this property called enable tab scrolling, it gives us that out of the box. So let's do that. We'll come in here and say enable tab scrolling, and we'll set that to true. And as soon as I do that, we can see that I have now a scrollable buttons available on it. Now we can see just by adding a simple feature on this control, you can really start leveraging the DevExpress controls power. All right, so let's bring in now the form layout. To do that, we're going to go back to the demo and simply copy over what we saw earlier. So as I showed you, we've got this form layout. It's got this adaptive grid layout. And to use it, I'm going to go to the ASPX page. and copy it over. Now, you can copy the entire page by clicking this little copy to clipboard, but that's going to copy the entire HTML page. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this form layout, copy this, and we'll bring that and replace page 1 here with the content of that form layout. Now, I do want to make you aware, Visual Studio has a lot of shortcuts into it. One of them, I believe, is called Control K, Control D, which essentially aligns all of the code here. So I'm going to say Control K, Control D. Now, as I mentioned, you want to be careful when you're simply pasting code. Now, as I mentioned in the past, I would recommend that you go to Design View, drag the control from the toolbox, drop it onto the form, and then use the Properties tab to customize it. And yes, you can still do that. And the reason I'm showing this approach today is because Visual Studio has come a long way in how good it is even on this text view. So mainly today I'm going to be dealing with the text view. So let's customize this. And as I mentioned, you want to be a little bit careful. So when we're dropping this in here, I want to be careful because I don't have any data binding that I copied over. So because I don't have that, I want to remove anything with a data source ID. So I'm going to remove the combo boxes data source ID and text field because I don't have this data bound to anything. So, and I also want to change the form layouts caption. So right now it says registration form. So let's call this data entry form instead of registration form. And therefore, we should probably change the text button as the text of the button from sign up to something like submit. All right. So just by doing this and having the form layout from the demo, we had a width of 100%. So just by doing this, we can see that the form layout is now going to be under the tab control, and we have now laid out a new page. So as you can see, now that it's come up, and now that I hit F12, we can see the form layout. Not only do we have the collapsible side panels, but the form layout is adaptive. And it's going to look great whether it's on a mobile, tablet, or desktop device. Now, let's start adding some content to our pages as well, because a lot of times we're not just going to have a form control. So I'm going to bring in some content. Let's copy over some of this lorem ipsum text because it's Latin and it's the standard text. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the content for the pages for the article page is in the app data folder. So if I go to article.html, you can see, and I'll just ignore this line endings warning here. I'm going to copy over a couple of these paragraphs, and we can simply add them to our page as well. So not only let's add it to page 2 here, and it'll be interesting to put some kind of heading that says some content. Now, what's nice is we can also, now that we got this content, add it to our form layout control as well. So let's add it to the bottom of the form layout control and paste it. Now, as I mentioned, Visual Studio has a nice shortcut. If I hold down Control and hit K and D, it will realign all that text. Okay, so let's see what this looks like now in the browser. Now, as I mentioned, we have our text, and it looks okay. I don't think it looks great, though. In this case, when it's small, yes, it's readable, and I can see it, but it really doesn't look like that article page. And you're saying to yourself, Mehul, you said it's readability was kind of built into this. Well, readability has a lot to do with how the text is formatted. And in this case, we don't have any margins set on this. So let's do that. Let's see how we can start setting up some CSS and some margins for this text content. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to wrap this stuff inside of a div. So let's come in here and first wrap it in a div. Now you might say, why not just add a width to the form layout? Yes, you can do that, but it's really not the smart way to do that. What I mean by that is that you can start adding individual CSS items, but really the better way to do it is to leverage the items into a central area. So we've got a grid view CSS for the grid view page. We've got an overall content CSS that has a lot of the content rules for the entire site. And so we should really make one called form layout CSS. And so we can start applying a lot of the rules there. All right, so to do that, I'm going to wrap this form layout and this content here inside the div. Now, as I mentioned, Visual Studio has gotten better. So when I first was working on this demo, I actually put the div here, and I said, well, wait a minute, why is Visual Studio not giving me this closing div? And I said, okay, I'll just type it in, and Visual Studio's like, hey, wait a minute, this end tag has no matching start tag. And I'm like, wait a minute, why is that? And that's because outside the content control area, and this div should really be over here because the form layout control is over there. And Visual Studio says, oh, yeah, okay, that's good. You are now putting the div in the right place. And so we want to do a similar thing here and wrap this in a div as well. And so now when I close this, you can see that we can just simply come in here and wrap the div here as well. And so again, I put that in the wrong place. Visual Studio complained, so let's put it in the right place. Hit Control K, Control D. All right, so at this point, we simply just wrapped it in a div, which will do essentially nothing at this point because we actually haven't defined it. So to really set this up properly, what we want to do is we want to set up a class that we can refer to in our CSS. So I'm going to say that this is the form layout container. And so this form layout container, actually let's call this it's good to have the first letter be lowercase. And so I'll call this the form layout container class, and we should do this with our div here as well. And then what I can do is I can say, let's create a CSS file that we can reference this form layout container. Okay, so I'll come into the content folder, right click, say add, and say style sheet, and we'll call this form layout. And now instead of body, I'll say I've got a form layout container. Of course, it needs a dot, and this form layout container is going to have a maximum width. And now this maximum width can be defined in several ways. I'll just set it for 900 pixels. And you might say, well, why so big? Well, actually, because, and I'll show you this in a second. Now you might say, okay, well, I've defined a CSS, I've got the container, is it going to work? Well, of course it's not, because we're not actually referencing the CSS. And if we take a look at the grid view page, in the head section, we can see that we've got this style sheet link. And so I'm going to copy this over and bring it into the head section of our page. But instead of grid view, we want to call it form layout. Okay, so what we did was we now have a central area for our form layout page that we can put a lot of our rules. And if we take a look at this in the browser now, we can see that our text is looking a lot more readable. And so not only is it looking great on this page, it's looking great here. And even if we are going to resize this, we can see that text is still going to look great, and it's still going to collapse down. Our main content is here, and on the desktop it's going to look great because we defined a maximum width as well. So you can see a lot of these stuff in our own content CSS items here as well, to see what we did for the text content, what we did for those printing rules. All that stuff is built in here and for you to take advantage of. So you can even start using some of these rules directly as well. Now, we've made the content readable. We've got a form layout. Let's take a look now at that form layout a little bit deeper, because we can see if we take a look at the text selection here, element selection, and I highlight this here, if you see this green area on the left and the right hand side of the form layout, we can see it does not align with our div content here at the bottom. Now, this would make any designer super angry. They'll say, what is happening here? I'm okay with the paddings on the top and the bottom, but I don't like those items. And so to fix that, what we can do is we can come into Visual Studio, and there's a property of the page control, I'm sorry, not the page control, the form layout control that we can use. And it's called Use Default Paddings. And so I'll say use default paddings, and I'll set this to false. Now, what this will do is it's going to say, I'm going to get rid of those extra default paddings. And now our content aligns. However, it also got rid of some of the top and bottom paddings. And so let's take advantage of that CSS file we created and do that. So let's add a CSS class to the form layout here, and we'll call it form layout. And so now we can come back to our form layout CSS and define the paddings for this form layout. So now, simply by adding that CSS class, adding a padding top and a padding bottom, and now taking a look at this in the browser again, we'll see our form layout not only will have it aligned on the left and right hand side, but it's going to give us those extra paddings at the top and the bottom. Now, if in case you are working with CSS or JavaScript, a lot of times the browsers, sometimes they won't refresh those files because they like to cache it to give you better performance. You can always hit Shift F5 or Control F5, which will invalidate the cache and re-download those files. So I recommend doing that if you're working. Sometimes you're saying, well, why didn't it update the way I wanted it to? So now we've got a great form layout and it looks fantastic. Let's make this page a little more interesting. And if we saw in the grid view, we've got this really nice left-hand side content. So how do we do that? Let's do that. Let's bring in some of those items from the grid view page specifically. And if we take a look at grid view, we can see that it's got a lot of great sections here. It's got the toolbar and all this kind of stuff. But if I do a search for left panel, I've got this left panel content area, and in it I've got a nav bar. So let's do this. Let's bring over this nav bar into our form layout page ourselves. And I'll put it right inside the left panel content area here as well, and align all the items. Now, instead of calling it filters, let's rename it and call it categories. So we'll call this categories, and we want to be careful about when we copy some of this stuff over. So as I mentioned, that if there's some CSS you might need, well, you want to be careful, and I'll mention that in just a second. But also, let's also change around. So instead of having all of these items here, let's take out most of these items and instead put in what we called categories. So I've got instead something like category 1, and we'll change the name to category 1 as well without a space, and remove selected to, well, we'll leave selected to true, but we want to make sure that when we cut and paste and make additional categories, that only one of the items is selected. Okay, so now I've got a few categories, and I've renamed them as category 1 and 2 and so forth. Now, let's take a look at this now in the browser, because I want to show you that why you should be really careful about how we cut and paste when we do this kind of stuff. Because it is easy. Visual Studio helps us out a lot, but that doesn't mean we always solve all the problems. And the first thing we'll notice is that if we take a look at the grid view page here, the grid view page, its sidebar has hot tracking. It also has the selected item. And if we take a look at ours doesn't have any of that stuff. And if when I click on a category, I don't get anything being selected. Well, what's going on? Well, if you take a look at the browser tools, we've got an error here. And it says reference error on filter navbar item click. Aha! So it looks like I've got a client-side event that I don't have the code for. So I'll simply remove that. So that's one thing we want to be careful about. Now, if we take a look at the code, in the content folder for the grid view CSS, we can see that there's also some CSS that we can copy over into our own CSS and bring that over. So now I've got some CSS as well. And if we take a look at this in the browser, we'll see that our form layout should remove that, first of all, that error that we got rid of, but also we've got hot tracking, We've got some better looking categories as well. And so I want to point out now an interesting item of this page control. I'm sorry, this nav bar, and that is it's got a way to navigate to specific URLs. So let's say we put in a property here called navigate URL that says, listen, when I go to this, I want you to go to a specific page, the form layout page. And so let's copy this over and say, listen, for category 2, I wanted to put a query string parameter of 2 and 3. Now you might use this query string parameter for something, maybe not. But what I want is when I click this item, I want it to navigate to it. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's a great property inside the nav bar that you can take advantage of called a sync selection mode. And so sync selection mode has a couple of options. By default, it's of course none. And there's a simple one called current path. So let's actually first set it to none. And so when we set it to none, we'll see that when I click an item, the query string parameter is there, but it's not selecting my item in the nav bar. Or if I navigate using the URL, it is also not selecting it. Well, sync selection mode helps us solve that by saying, listen, if I set it to current path and query, and then take a look at this in the browser, we can see the form layout has that option now. So when I go to category 3, or whether I browse to it from the URL string here, we'll see that it updates. All right, now we can see in the grid view page, we've also got that sticky toolbar. So let's do that. But instead of bringing it from the grid view page, let's bring it over from, let's say, the scheduler here. All right, to do that, of course, we're just going to bring it in from the page itself. And if we take a look at the page toolbar area, we can see I've got this entire SPX menu. So I'm going to copy this entire thing over, and we'll bring that into our toolbar area. Now, if I paste this in, hit Control K, Control D. Now, I want to be, as I mentioned, I've learned my lesson, so I don't want to keep anything I don't need. So I'll remove this client-side event, which we don't have a need for. Let's remove the client instance name as well. And we'll remove the, we can remove the CSS class. I don't think we need to bring in that toolbar, but we saw earlier we can simply go in and copy that content over. Now, the one thing is I don't want to call it scheduler. This is the form layout toolbar, so I'll call it the form layout toolbar in case I have any need to reference it. And let's change around, and instead of calling it scheduler, we'll call it form layout. Now we can see that we have other controls in here as well. Now we can customize this, we can hook these up, and you can see from those pages how to do that. For now, I'm going to remove that just to show you that just by adding this toolbar, we have a great toolbar available to us. So now, if we take a look at this in the browser, we have built up a full page in our item. It looks almost like the grid view. We've got content here that's readable, it's adaptive, it looks great on different items. Now, you might be saying, that's great, but how do I navigate to it? How do I add it to my menu? Well, it's really easy. If you go back to the app data folder, in it we've got this sitemap file. Now, to add any items in there, you simply come in here and say, I've got a new item in here, and it's called the form layout, and of course we'll call it form layout. And if we take a look at this in the browser, we can see that we've got the form layout, and you might say, well, yeah, that looks great, but you know, what about the icon? Well, you can see that it's missing an icon when it's in the collapsed menu. Well, to solve that, all you really have to do is if you go into the images and their content, you can see we've added several SVG files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste a couple of the grid view files. I've got grid view -white and grid view that is available. So let's rename this. So the way this works is it's by convention. So what you need to do is you need to have a file that has the same name as the title of your node. So in our case, it's form layout. So I've got now an SVG called form layout, and to find the selected version, you need to have it called -white. And so let's remove this thing that says copy and rename this to form layout. So now I've got form layout and form layout -white, and if we take a look at this in the browser now, we can see that we have icons, excuse me, icons available for this item as well. All right, so now we've got an icon, we've got a menu option that takes us directly to the form layout, and it's responsive, it's adaptive, it's fantastic. Okay, I've got a few more minutes, so let's take this opportunity to add a map. Now, we saw earlier that when we add a page, we're going to need to add a node. Now, I haven't added the page yet, but I know it's going to be called map, so I'm already adding the menu option here while I'm inside of this. So I've got map here. Now, let's do that. Let's add the map control by coming up here on the project, right-click, select add, select new item. As we saw before, it's going to be derived off of that root master page. Now I'll call it map. I'll hit OK. And now we've got the map page. Now you might say, well, what kind of map do we want to add? Well, let's add something from Google Maps. To leverage Google Maps, what we can do is if you go to Google Maps and select any area. In my case, I've selected Los Angeles, California. So here's Greater Los Angeles. Here's good old Glendale, and that's me. I'm actually here right now as we speak. And so what I want to do is I want to embed this portion. To do that, Google lets you select this share button, and it's got the embed a map section. So I'm going to copy this little iframe code here. I'm going to select copy HTML, and what we can do now is we can come into our page content and paste essentially this iframe right in here. Now, if we take a look at this in the browser, I'll hit Control F5, and this will bring up now our map page. Oops, let's bring it up into the right browser. All right, so if we take a look at this in the browser, this map now is here, but it's not responsive or adaptive really. Well, we can easily solve that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the width from fixed to 100%. Okay, and just by doing that, our map is going to give us a responsive map that's going to have already a great way to change this. Now you might say, well, yeah, but what about the height? Well, we can't set the height to 100%. Well, the reason is because we've got this sticky footer. Now, this is, of course, one of the elements that we've baked into this for you, and this could be really important. As you know, rules for websites are changing. I'm sure last year you saw with all of the new items from different items that people have been changing their privacy policies and terms of service, and it's important to maybe display this. So we've got this footer, and you don't necessarily just want to set this content to 100% and hide your footer. We need to have a smart way to calculate the footer area as well as the window height and do a little bit of math and say, listen, change this, and if the browser changes, size changes, I want you to change the map as well. So how do we do that? Well, this is where we're going to need to do some JavaScript. Well, okay, to do this is actually fairly easy when you see what we've baked into this project template for you. So what you want to do is to set up a auto height, we're going to need to refer to this iframe. Now we could wrap it in a div, but it'll be easier just to give it an ID that we can reference. In our case, we'll call it map container. And now we can refer to this in JavaScript. So what I'll do, and as I mentioned, you might say, well, you've been doing great, but you're bringing in a map.js file now. Yes, and that's just to spare you from watching me type all this JavaScript. But essentially, it's a content that's interesting, and it's really well documented. But as you can see, we've got something called a just map container that says, listen, get me that element. So it's going to go look for that map container. It's going to go get us that element, that iframe element, and then via JavaScript, it's going to reference it called container. And then we're going to get the footer wrapper element, grab its height, and call it footer wrapper height. And then we're going to do a little bit of math that says calculate the height. Find out the window's inner height, the footer, and the header panel. And then we're going to set the container's height to that. So essentially, we're doing a little bit of math to figure out how high the window is and the header panel and the footer wrapper, and putting the wrapper in between them. So that's great. Standard map, nothing fancy there. What really is interesting in this file, what I want you to pay attention to, is this delegate method. And as it says here, this delegate method is called when the available page content area is resized, whether the browser is resized, expanded, or collapsed. And you might say, wow, well, that's fantastic. It is fantastic. Why? Because this delegate method is baked into the standard script.js file. And so this is exposed to you, and you can leverage that. And at any time you have something on a page that you say, listen, this is going to get resized. I want to kick it off. I want this project template to kick off this client-side method and do some calculations and do something on the client side. But that's what this method does for you. So it's hooked right in. Several of our controls may take advantage of it, and you can as well. And so let's do that. So we've got we've got our map page. And so how do we do that? We have our code in map.js, and it's called a just map container. And what we want to do is we want to really call this on map init. To do that, what we're going to do is simply we're going to add on map init. So we're going to come in here to our map ASPX file, and right after the iframe, we're going to add a script tag. So I'm going to call a script tag, and inside the script tag we can say on map init, and this will call that method. And anytime the browser resizes, it's going to call it and do that calculation and adjust this map's height. But you might say, well, is it going to work? Of course it's not. Why? Because we got to bring in and use that file. So I'll go back to grid view file here, and I'll take a look at, I'll copy over this script tag that says, listen, in the map ASPX file, under the head section, I want to call map.js. And so now it's going to reference the map.js file. So when we call this map init, it knows where to get it. Okay, now let's take a look at this in the browser. And as you can see here, our map has not only an auto height, as we'll see, it's also got our footer that it keeps displaying. So as I resize the browser, the map resizes as well. Now, there's one last thing though that is not looking quite right, and that is I've got this scroll bar. So regardless of how high I make it, that scroll bar is always there, and it's annoying. And so here I have to point out one thing, and that is I have to use a little bit of a CSS trick, because this is actually a little browser bug. And yes, it's been reported in Chrome, and you might say, well, Chrome is owned by Google and Google Maps is owned by Google. As you know, large corporations have several different departments, so I'm sure some team at Google is looking into it. But essentially, it's just a little browser bug that you can fix with a little CSS. And so what I'm going to do, and I'm not a huge fan of doing it this way, and neither is Julian. So you likely want to add your style to a central content area, maybe call it map.css and reference it via CSS class and all that. For now, I'm just going to put it in the style section, and that is this vertical align text bottom. And so if we take a look at this in the browser now, we'll see that it has gotten rid of that little item. And what's great now, and let's take a look at this in the browser tools. Now, you might be going, hey, wait a minute, what's this error? And that's because, if you remember, I didn't define the icon file. So I can simply copy over grid view and rename it map.svg and map-white.svg, and that'll get rid of this error. But essentially, it's looking for a resource that it's not finding. So let's focus back here because we have built a fantastic site. And as you can see, regardless of the size, it looks great. So I've got a responsive layout. I've got a standard layout. And if we look at our form layout, take a look at our map. It's adaptive. It's responsive. And as you can see, I've got these collapsible panels. Now, one thing I want to mention about these panels is if, let's say, on the map I didn't want this right-hand panel, I can easily come in here and say, listen, I don't want that content area. So we can remove the right panel content. And if we take a look at this in the browser, and let's bring this back up here, and I'll simply refresh this page. And now if we take a look at this here, it's gotten rid of that right-hand content area altogether. Okay, I apologize, I went a little bit over, and I'll stop it here and give it back to Amanda. Amanda, is there any questions that went unanswered?
Hey, Mehul, the team has been flying through. We had a lot of questions. There are a couple that have not been answered yet, though.
Sure. Could you, okay, so something about, is there a path to update existing projects or just copy? Keith, I would say no, because this essentially is baking in a lot of smarts, a lot of the new CSS and JavaScript. So I recommend you're better off to create a new project and then bring in the code, as I did, from the existing pages, and then just rebind and so forth. So really what we're doing here is we're building that shell. So I would say go with the new shell and use that approach. Curtis asked, is this available in 17.2? No, this is available as of 18.2. So Curtis, upgrade. You know you want to. All right, is there a long-term commitment to support this application? So I promised you that I would talk a little bit about future plans. So let me do that now. And when we first released this blog post, the comments were great, but a lot of them was like, yes, but what about DevExtreme? So we have already announced that we have plans to bring this over for DevExtreme and ASP.NET Core in 2019. It's part of our roadmap. And we have also announced that this is going to be available for Bootstrap web forms as well. So this is coming to Bootstrap web forms in 2019, this exact same responsive project template. Now, one other thing I want to mention is if, and again, I'll post, when this goes up on YouTube, I post all these links in the description as well. So this is available under DevExpress examples. It is one of our awesome Code Central examples, but you can fork this right from, so if there's something about this project template you did not like, you can fork it, or you can use it right from Visual Studio as I showed. So this is fully available to you. And as you saw from this here, I am on Twitter, so find me on Twitter at Mehul Harry, or email me, mehul@DevExpress. If there's any questions, the best way you can give us some of your feedback is use this project template. Let us know how it's working for you. If you find some kind of issue like, hey, a lot of our users are using the new Galaxy Note S59 and we had this issue, let us know. I'd love to see what you've built with this. I'm always excited to see customer demos, and a lot of you have, by the way. We just can't show you because we respect our users' privacy, so we don't show you other customers' information. But we love to see it when you share it with us privately through support or emails and so forth. Now, there's questions about like how do we make the grid responsive. Again, go to the demos. A lot of the demos show you a lot of this stuff out of the box. You don't make just the grid essentially responsive. There isn't one feature. A lot of times some features make sense to be responsive and some don't. The grid view is a big control, like the scheduler. So as it makes sense, there are features that you can enable and say, hey, I want this part of the grid to be responsive, and I'll disable this feature when it goes on mobile. So you can make those kind of decisions yourself. The grid is largely responsive now if you take a look at the demos. Now, is web forms, here's a great question. Is web forms app with DevExpress controls lean enough? Willem, I would say yes. You know, there's a lot of knock about it, and this is where, how do I say it? The short answer is this is where the developer religion comes into it, saying, hey, this platform is better because it's more leaner. Hey, listen, whichever platform works for you, I don't really care, right? There are great websites out there that you will never believe were built with web forms or React or so forth. You have to take a look at what your developers are good at, what works for you, and at the end of the day, you can make any platform good or bad. And yes, there's advantages. We know these days client side is way more popular, but that doesn't mean web forms is gone. We see the numbers, as does Microsoft, and we know how popular web forms is, which is why the turnout on this webinar was great. So it's up to you. If you prefer the React approach, wait until the DevExtreme team puts out a project template based on that. But for now, this is web forms, this is MVC, and you can use that today. We feel our web controls are very lean, very fast. They don't have as many client-side features though, right? That's what the client-side DevStream library is for. So if that's what you want. So is there a ton of client-side API? Yes, but these are server-side controls. They have a lot of great client-side features, and as we see, more and more are there. But at the heart of them, these are server-side controls. That means they get rendered on the server side. And I would say, if you're an ASP.NET developer, you love that. You love that feature to be able to do that. So again, let's not really dive too deep into that. With that, let's end it here. I will give back to Amanda, but please feel free to reach out to me. You know I love talking to you. And here's all my info again. I thank you very much for joining us today. Amanda, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mehul. All right, everybody. Like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat box. While you're on our YouTube channel, please subscribe and ring the bell so that you're notified when we release any new content. You will also get a follow-up email with a link to this webinar recording. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.